The original Bioshock features so many memorable moments. Its incredible opening sequence and the reveal of Rapture, the amazing Fort Frolic and the story of crazed artist Sander Cohen, and many more besides. But part of the game that in my view is talked about nowhere near enough is Bioshock's first proper area, the Medical Pavilion, and the fantastic job developer Irrational Games does of continuing to subtly tutorialise proceedings long past the game's beginning. And it's that clever little level that I want to highlight in more detail during this video. But before I attempt to explain why Bioshock's Medical Pavilion is such a well-crafted experience, let's quickly remind ourselves of what happened prior to entering the area. After surviving a plane crash, the player character, known only as Jack, finds himself stranded in the middle of the ocean and seeks refuge in a mysterious lighthouse nearby. Entering a bathysphere, he is introduced to the city's founder Andrew Ryan just moments before the underwater city of Rapture is revealed. Arriving in Rapture, Jack picks up a radio and begins making his way through the ruined city, guided by a man named Atlas who requests that Jack travels to an area named Neptune's Bounty to help him rescue his family. During his travels, Jack finds his first plasmid, special serums which use a substance known as Adam to grant users extraordinary powers. He meets several of Rapture's disfigured inhabitants, known as splicers, and even crosses paths with several little girls who have been genetically modified to collect the Adam, as well as their protectors, nicknamed Little Sisters and Big Daddies respectively. As Jack nears Neptune's Bounty, his route forward is blocked, and soon after he finds himself trapped by Andrew Ryan, with a gang of rather angry splicers hot on his heels. But just as it looks like it may be the end of the road for Jack, Atlas manages to unlock an alternative route, and Jack promptly escapes into the Medical Pavilion. The Medical Pavilion is where Bioshock really begins to spread its wings. Whereas much of the game's first 25 minutes or so I've just described is focused on introducing what I'd describe as Bioshock's basic mechanics, such as movement, combat and plasmids, as well as setting the scene, the area you find yourself in next is a far less linear affair. While this absolutely makes for a much more engaging and rewarding experience in terms of gameplay, it without doubt would have also presented a somewhat difficult question Irrational Games needed to answer when designing the area. That question being, how do you build on Bioshock's opening and continue to teach players about the wealth of gameplay options on offer, but in a less linear space and without relying on the scripted sequences used to such great effect up until that point? Irrational begins answering this question from the Medical Pavilion's very beginning, and it all starts with this vending machine. It may not seem like a very exciting vending machine, but it's deliberately placed in a quiet area featuring no enemies so that you can safely investigate it. But that's not the only reason it's placed where it is. Nearby, you'll also find a downed security bot, and upon investigating, you can take part in a minigame to bring it back online. Big deal, Ben, you might be shouting at your screen. Neither of these inclusions seem that clever. And you're right, in isolation, they aren't particularly. However, what you might not have noticed is that until you hack the security bot, you're not even presented with the option to hack the vending machine. And it's this extra little step Irrational throws in so often during the Medical Pavilion that makes it such a joy to play. In this first instance, a new gameplay opportunity is presented to you organically, but in a fairly obvious manner, in this case with the security bot and the hacking minigame. But you're then left to your own devices to put two and two together and figure out how else what you've just learned can be applied to the world around you, for example by then hacking the vending machine which you were previously unable to tamper with. Mere moments later, you'll unsuccessfully attempt to unlock the bathysphere leading to Neptune's Bounty, and Atlas informs you that you'll have to instead brave the Medical Pavilion's main area, within which lurks the terrifying Dr. Steinman.
Parasite welfare.
If you want to use the emergency access, you'll be needing Dr. Steinman. He's the one that runs this place. But I don't expect him to hand it to you out of the milk of human kindness. Steinman ain't that kind, and frankly, I'm not even sure he's still human.
And again, it's here we see another example of Irrational guiding you on how to be successful in the city of Rapture. Picking up the machine gun nearby and unlocking the route forwards, you'll be attacked by a group of splicers. Notice how this encounter is set up. You're given a machine gun, a relatively long-range weapon, and are then forced to fight enemies who rush you from a distance. In writing, there's the famous expression show don't tell, and I like to think of moments like this one as the video game equivalent, play don't tell. Instead of using a radio message message or similar to tell you that the machine gun is effective from a distance. Irrational puts you in a situation where playing Bioshock allows you to come to that conclusion yourself. You'll most likely begin shooting the splicers with the machine gun as soon as they arrive on the scene, and hopefully then quickly begin to better understand exactly what the weapon's strengths are. And before we move on, do be sure to keep this example of how the machine gun is introduced in the back of your mind, as something similar might just happen with another weapon later on. Upon entering the Medical Pavilion proper, you're greeted with a rather grisly scene.
You keep an eye peeled for Steinman. The daft bastard set up shop in the surgery wing. You want to find him? Just follow the blood.
And before we continue exploring the area, a quick note on Steinman and the mini-narrative of sorts which runs through this section of the game. It's pretty great. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, as I think there are better examples of how environment and character go hand in hand within Bioshock, the way Sander Cohen and Fort Frolic reflect on each other being the obvious example, but it's nonetheless handled really well. The grotesque pictures scattered across the pavilion, the messages written in blood, and even the odd deceased patient here and there paint a picture of a man who lost his mind and made so many of his patients suffer terribly due to his obsession with asymmetry. As mentioned, I don't think it is the best area in the game when it comes to this side of things, but the fact it's still fairly strong and the pavilion also features all the other cool design choices I'll touch on over the course of this video makes the area as a whole a particularly impressive feat. Almost immediately upon entering the area, you'll come across a machine gun turret, at which point Atlas will get in touch with a handy hint. And I'm not such a fan of this. During Bioshock's opening, you're taught that the electrobolt plasmid can be used to short-circuit machinery, and at the start of the pavilion, you learn machines can be hacked, and so I would have preferred if here you were left to figure things out on your own, much like in many of the other situations you find yourself in during this level. It's not the end of the world by any means, but it does happen a few too many times as you explore, which is a bit of a shame. The next discovery, however, is rather clever indeed. As you walk down this corridor near the pavilion's entrance, you'll likely spot this ice blocking the door to a side room, and immediately after, you'll probably spot this big bright sign which has the word flame written on it, as well as an actual flame burning. It's not a stretch to say that most seasoned gamers will realise just from coming across the ice that they need some sort of firepower to clear a path, but you have to remember that not everyone will come to that conclusion straight away, and so I like that Irrational includes an extra hint very close by to give you a nudge in the right direction. Again, they give you enough information to solve the problem, but stop short of spelling out exactly what you need to do, so you still have the opportunity to put two and two together and have that lovely aha moment as you figure things out for yourself. Exploring the Eternal Flame Crematorium itself, you'll eventually head upstairs and will most likely notice a huge pool of something that doesn't quite look like water on the ground. And this is another great example of level design encouraging a certain response. To access the Incinerate plasmid, you have to crawl through a vent to pick it up, and the inclusion of the vent is very clever as it further draws your attention to the oil on the ground. Entering the room through a door, you may have simply thought the puddle was water and not paid too much attention. After all, you come across quite a few puddles in Rapture, but forcing you near ground level definitely helps focus you in on this particular puzzle, which serves a greater purpose. After picking up the Incinerate plasmid, you'll again be accosted by a trio of splicers, but unlike the scene at the end of the introduction, this time you have a means of fighting back. Yet again, everything is set up in such a way that you should be able to figure out what to do all by yourself. The vent helped draw your attention to the puddle of oil surrounding the room, and the Incinerate plasmid creates fire. You've been given all the information you need to succeed, and you're then left to join the dots yourself. Equipped with your new flaming plasmid, you might think yourself strong enough to take on Steinman himself, and so you head in his direction, only for him to block your path.
We're not finished! Not finished!
You'll have to find some way to get through to surgery and Steinman. Chin up now. The Lord hates a quitter. I can hear that splicer sounding off like it's the 4th of July. Explosives are hard to come by down here, but if you get your hands on one of them telekinesis plasmids, you can catch the damn firebombs and toss it right back in its gob, or anything else that might be standing in your way.
which means unfortunately, you still need to find one more plasmid in order to progress. Heading downstairs, you'll need to melt an even larger block of ice to proceed, and will then soon come across a shotgun lying on the floor just begging to be picked up, at which point everything suddenly goes dark. Now, cast your mind back to earlier when I said Irrational had set up a scenario specifically designed to show you where the machine gun is most effective. Well, this encounter does similar for the shotgun, where you were previously placed in an area that catered to mid to long range combat, exactly what the weapon is designed for. Here, the small illuminated area you find yourself fending off splicers within is specifically set up to play to the shotgun's strengths, the idea being that you'll use your newfound weapon from close range right off the bat, and again, understand straight away exactly how to get the most value from it without needing to be explicitly told. There's two more things I want to highlight during this section. The first is this. This is in no way a clever teachable moment like the ones featured during the rest in the video. I just wanted to mention it as I still think it's one of my favourite jump scares in any video game. The second is in Dandy Dental, where you find the telekinesis plasmid needed to unblock the path to Steinman. Here again, the principle of teaching you new tricks organically using environmental cues continues. In the trophy hallway at the back of the area sits the telekinesis plasmid. After collecting it from the Gatherer's Garden machine, you'll hopefully do a 180-degree turn and notice the pair of big red buttons ahead of you. Fingers crossed you'll give one of them a push, and between the tennis balls being fired at you and the introductory video for the plasmid you've just watched, you'll take to the new abilities the plasmid offers like a duck takes to water. However, Irrational does also want you to experiment and work things out for yourself, and there are two chances to do so in the immediate vicinity. The less obvious one is in the form of the trophies, which you can fire tennis balls at to knock down items. This is Bioshock telling you that telekinesis can be used to access items in hard-to-reach places. The second, more obvious learning opportunity comes via the splicer who enters Dandy Dental as you turn to leave. They stop to examine a corpse, which very conveniently has a gas canister lying almost directly beside it, and this should be enough to teach you another lesson, that certain objects in the environment can also be used offensively. The examples I've pointed out here, and those involving the incinerate plasmid beforehand, may seem obvious to most if not all of you, but they're also really important. At this stage of Bioshock, most will still be getting used to the idea of using plasmids, and Irrational wants you to be able to figure these things out easily. They want you to understand that plasmids don't just have a use in combat, but can also be used to open new paths or discover new items as well, and setting up these various scenarios will help push most to think in those terms from a very early point. All that's left to do now is take down Steinman himself, and there's even a final skill check of sorts thrown in before you reach him. To access the final area, you have to catch a grenade and use it to clear the rubble he created, which is placed where it is to ensure that you 100% do know how to use the telekinesis plasmid properly. And as if that wasn't enough, there's even a splicer standing in a pool of oil you can set alight immediately after. Using it is not a requirement to progress like the grenade throw just moments prior, but it again gives you one last opportunity to practice your plasmid use before taking on the Medical Pavilion's boss. After taking down that final splicer, you arrive at Steinman himself.
What can I do with this one, Aphrodite? She won't stay still! I want to make them beautiful, but they always turn out wrong! That one too fat! This one too tall! This one too symmetrical! And now, what's this guy? The intruder! He's ugly! 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 This boss fight is brilliant in its simplicity. Steinman himself doesn't really do anything extravagant, but this battle isn't really about that. It's about offering you as many opportunities as possible to put into practice the skills with plasmids you've learned so far. The lower area is filled with water, perfect for electrobolt, and the main area features both oil that can be set alight and gas canisters which can be hurled at Steinman. At this point, you can only carry 2 plasmids, so you'll likely be carrying telekinesis plus one of either incinerate or electrobolt, but no matter which you're carrying, there are plenty of ways they can all be put to good use.
Once Steinman has been dispatched, you'll begin to head back to the bathysphere, but be forced to make a detour, at which point you'll come across the first little sister you can choose to harvest or save, as well as a gatherer's garden which allows you to buy it and upgrade plasmids. You can then also choose to take on a Big Daddy for the first time, and will hopefully put everything you learned into action to successfully take one down. And it's these extra discoveries at the area's conclusion that really seal the deal for me in terms of the Medical Pavilion being a second tutorial of sorts. By the time you leave the area, you will have acquired most, if not all, of the knowledge you need for the rest of the game, and experienced the majority of mechanics that you'll be able to use to your advantage over the course of the rest of Bioshock. To put it simply, Bioshock's Medical Pavilion is absolutely brilliant. It teaches you new tricks, reminds you of slightly older ones, and it does it all without you necessarily realising you're even being taught. And all of this is wrapped up in a story that isn't perhaps quite the best the game has to offer, but is still extremely compelling nonetheless. The Medical Pavilion may not quite pack as much of a punch as other parts of the game in terms of storytelling or world building, but what it does better than almost any other game out there is continue to train you up in the most subtle of ways possible, and to me at least, the way it does it is simply fantastic. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and splicers. If you enjoyed it, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know your thoughts, and perhaps even supporting the channel via Patreon, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.